the process of creating music. Back in the day, there were programs like Cakewalk and Cubase and some others that were just getting started, let's say in the late 80s. And before that, there were these digital workstations. But they really took off when it became in the box and native. And so then everybody was able to use very sophisticated programs to create music. And back in the day, it was much more troublesome to get things to function properly. And in reality, the producers and composers and technicians had to be constant beta testers and troubleshooters, and there were constant patches to the software. And also the internet was slower, so you didn't just download the whole thing off the internet. Maybe sometimes you'd get it on a disk or have to go buy the new version at the store. But now it's like every time you check for an update, there might be an update. But anyways, so it was very hit and miss with working with DAWs back in the day, but they got a little more stable over time. And what happened was people would develop their system in such a way that they would lock it in place if it worked. So if you think of things like Pro Tools and Cubase and Logic, these guys really took the realm and the wheel, and they really drove the modern music industry. And then now we have things that are well beyond those basic ideas, but they're not necessarily more powerful, but they're just extensions on those ideas of music creation. Programs like Fruity Loops and such. But anyways, so the instruments were very flaky and buggy and would often crash, and you'd be in the middle of a song and you might lose the entire song. So that's one example of like how different the world is right now. Now the autosaves work really great. The stability is much improved. There's still occasional issues, believe it or not, but the stability is much different. You really are much more able to depend and rely on your previous work. And also the way that the work was saved in the iterations has changed to where they've got the formats down better, so that when you reopen a project in newer versions of the software, they should reopen properly again, versus the old days where you might have to really do a lot of searching for materials that were scattered all over the place. So anyways, nowadays, if you want to make music, so I have a program here called Logic Pro, and then I have synthesizers that are built into the system. And then I also have audio software or audio tracks. Okay, so that's an audio track, and that's a MIDI track, or what we call an audio instrument track or a virtual instrument track, VST technology. And what I would do is, for audio, I would choose what kind of channel, what kind of effects. So I would add all my various effects to make these crazy effects. So for instance, on this track, I might have a vocal, and then I'll do another one that has a drum, and then another one that has a bass, and another one that has et cetera, et cetera. And it's the same with the actual live played instruments. You would do as many as you need. And with systems like Logic and Cubase, Digital Performer, to name just a couple, you have pretty good performance. So you have a lot of use from the hard drive, because that's another thing that's occurred. The instruments themselves have become so much larger to where they really need lots of space and lots of RAM and a very fast computer. And so if you load up something like Omnisphere, you need like a super powerful machine. And if you load up very intensive orchestral instruments, you need a powerful hard disk and a powerful machine as well. And so for instance, something like Contact, you would open up Contact and you have access to various libraries of sound. And so from these sounds, I would select an instrument like a Celeste, right? And I'm sticking it in here. And then from this here, I could play my instrument. So, and then from there I could add effects. Stuff like that, and it just goes on and on because you have so many very different kinds of effects that are built into the system. And then you have external effects that you get from many hundreds and hundreds of providers. And one of my favorites is Melda Production. I was an early adopter, and they created a vast resource of effects processing tools. And they also have one that includes all of them built into the one system called MXXX. But they were first to really cover the bases of many different kinds of effects tools, DSP tools for your DAWs as a third party. Another big one was obviously like Waves, and then there are so many other very popular brands that would have these kinds of processors. And these processors apply to instruments, and they also apply to audio. Now, the reality of how music is made, you're not looking at something like this. You're looking at something that has very many tracks deep. So you might have like 100 tracks, or you might have something like 75 tracks. It just goes on and on. And you know, some of those will be audio, and of course you can do live recordings of your vocals and then reprocess them in many different ways. And so if I was going to mix them, I have a little mixer here where I can adjust the volume of all of these tracks. And then I can also change the effects and sounds from the mixer. And then I also have a score editor. So the score editor looks something like this. And with a score editor, you could draw stuff in. But you could also, of course, play it in. I mostly play in stuff because drawing it in would be a very long process. Now, if I'm doing heavily affected things, then I might actually draw some of the automation in, which brings us to automation. So this is an example of automation. If you look at, like, if I wanted to draw volume, I could draw the volume onto that track. So if we have a sound that played, and then I could then play that so that the volume would change however I drew it in to change. And it's just volume. And then you have many kinds of parameters with the different plugins that are automatable. And then you simply would use like this system here to open and close that, because it gets very distracting. Imagine looking at 50 different tracks that all have that automation. It would be too distracting to see that all at once, unless that's precisely what you're focused on. So that's just a basic overview of how these systems work. And it's your other main feature would be something like a transport, and this is basically a stop, play, record, rewind, etc. And so that's where if you were going to record something, you would go ahead and do that, engage recording. And then of course with Macs you have the built-in core audio, works pretty well. Then you can also use external hardware, and it's called an external sound card, and that would also supply your MIDI, because it's the way my system communicates. It would either be MIDI coming from a USB or MIDI coming from an actual MIDI interface, and the MIDI interface would then run through the USB of the sound card. And the sound cards are in the range of maybe $100 to $200, $300, and they're very good now. And that's another thing, that back in the day, the sound card was very hit and miss, and the fidelity was also something you had to pay a fine penny for. Whereas now you got companies like Presonus that have standardized very good quality fidelity, and then of course you have M-Audio and other brands like that. And with programs like this, it gets very deep. This is the one way to look at the notation or the data, and then another way to look at it would be the piano roll. And then you have ways of affecting tempo, and that we've done through these various systems. You could draw it in sort of like automation. You can affect key signature, the markers, arrangement. So when you hear modern music, it's coming out of a system like this. This is a mixer, okay? And the mixer, and this is called an arrange page for the DAW. And the DAW means digital audio workstation as well. So if you think about something like this, it has many thousands and thousands of parameters. They go in very deep. You have key commands to automate everything. But what I want to say is that modern music and modern mixing and all that kind of stuff, it generally is taking place on a basic system like this. Now, if you would take something like this little progression here, you do so much of that, and you can just keep creating. So you have all these tracks playing all the sound. So what you're listening to with music in the modern world is combinations of these virtual instruments, audio, digital signal processing, and automation of those events through the various mixers and automation lanes and such. Plus there's MIDI automation, and there's other ways to augment the tone from the various editors. Velocity, swing factor. So these elements would help one to humanize how the music will come out, because it's a key part of making realistically good music, is you have to be able to make it sound like it was performed. And with me, that's easy because 9 times out of 10, I'm actually performing it in versus just writing it in. But some people who would write it in, they would want to use additional features such as quantize to adjust the humanity, the human quality of the playing performance to make it more organic. So that's about it to cover how is modern music made. So when you hear, let's say, trailer music or hip hop music or dance music or soul music, nowadays it's starting and coming from programs like this that do everything you could imagine and so many things you'll never have time to even get to, because the DSP goes so very deep, and if you think about all the things that are involved in processing the sound of the instruments and things like that, from the synthesizer's point of view or from the effects point of view, the sky is the limit and they know no bounds. It gets better and better over time. Another very cool synth is the Avenger. This bad boy right here will make the most incredible electronic music you could ever imagine, and ethereal and all kinds of stuff. And another big brand is Native Instruments. They do very, very cutting edge stuff, and they have for many years, and their big thing has always been this native push. So they knew right off the jump that native was going to be a big deal. And so you have some of their popular ones are Massive or Absinthe for ethereal sounds. But a lot of your dubstep will come from, or electronic music, I should say, will come from a synthesizer like Massive. And of course, these DAWs, like Logic, include their own palette of instruments, such as these ones here. Like Alchemy is a very, very, very powerful synthesizer built into Logic. And it has pretty much every friggin' sound you could ever need. So why do you need more? Well, there's always more, and that's the point. And so there's always the added bonus of having a boutique or distinct sound to be able to perform that in to these various track lanes here. So that's the gist of what's going on with modern music. To give you an idea of how are these sounds produced, well, this is the basic structure.